There's a woman in Texas who was sentenced to prison for defying the lockdown, for defying the stay-at-home order. I believe she owns a salon, or she works at a salon. I think she owns it. And she was like, I'm not going to shut down. And there was a moment in court. This video kind of went viral. CNN covered it. Let's see how this unfolds, and then I'll talk about what I think of it.
But it is coming with showdowns here. There is one woman who was sentenced to 7 days in jail. Her name is Shelly Luther. She's the owner of a salon in the North Dallas area. She had stayed open despite the stay-at-home orders and despite the announcements from state government here that hair salons could not be open. Shelly Luther was given a citation by police. She received a cease and desist letter from a judge, which she ended up tearing up at a rally. And then in court yesterday, the judge told her if she apologized for her actions that she would not be sentenced to jail time. And this is what she told the judge.
I have to disagree with you, sir, when you say that I'm selfish, because feeding my kids is not selfish. I have hairstylists that are going hungry because they'd rather feed their kids. So, sir, if you think the law is more important than kids getting fed, then please go ahead with your decision, but I'm not going to shut the salon.
Shelly Luther receiving a good amount of support. There's a small protest here at the county jail in Dallas, and also the governor of Texas described her sentence as excessive. The attorney general describes it as shameful and outrageous, and Senator Ted Cruz described the decision as just nuts. But this is all ironic because just yesterday, the governor of Texas decided to ease the restrictions on hair salons, barbershops, and nail salons, allowing those businesses to open up this Friday. And when that happens, if nothing changes between now and then, Shelly Luther will still be in jail.
So, listen, I do not know what Shelly's politics are. But I have a hunch that, her and I may have some massive disagreements, and my preferences are not hers and vice versa. But this is such a perfect example of what's going on all across the country right now. You can't lock everything down, shut everything down, and then you don't do universal basic income. You don't do stimulus for the people more than a one-time $1,200 payment that only goes to some people. No, you got to do way more than that. They should have done a recurring UBI payment and a rent freeze and a mortgage freeze. And what you're seeing here is the logical conclusion of not doing a UBI, not doing a rent freeze, and not doing a mortgage freeze. Because if you make it so that people can sustain, you don't see somebody like Shelly acting like this. I believe her when she says, I can't pay the bills. I got to feed my kids. So I have no choice. I have to go to work. That's not selfish. That's not selfish at all. I believe her when she says that she doesn't have the money to weather the lockdown storm. So am I sympathetic to her? Absolutely. Absolutely. The government can't lock everything down and then keep charging you for your rent and for mortgage, and you have to pay that on no income. People in this country don't have savings, and that's not their fault. It's our economy is broken. So they don't have savings. They don't have the ability to stay locked down. So then those people, of course, are going to go to work, and then you lock them in prison or jail for 7 days. No. That's unacceptable. And this is why, I can't blame her. Now, I will say this. If they did UBI, and if they did a rent freeze and a mortgage freeze, well, then I immediately flip my position. And I say, no, Shelly, you're being unreasonable. Go back home. But my guess is that Shelly and most people in Shelly's position, if she could sustain through the lockdown and if she was getting a steady check through UBI, and she could afford the bills, then she'd be like, yeah, I'll stay home. Why wouldn't I? Yeah, I'll sit in my backyard. I'll sip a mojito. I'll go watch reruns of I Love Lucy. Like, why not? Why not? Why wouldn't I do it? So, we have to be careful on the left because there are a lot of these like reopen protests. And yes, don't get it twisted. Some of the people in the reopen protests are ridiculous. And they're like, I got to go back to Chili's. And they're really like trivial things that they're arguing over. And so, yes, you have full license to mock the people who want to reopen stuff for genuinely selfish reasons. They could afford the lockdown, but they're like, no, I want to go out and get Baskin Robbins, whatever it might be. But we got to be careful, because then there's also a very large number of people who just simply cannot afford the lockdown. And so when Shelley says, I got to go back to work, she means it, and I believe her. I totally believe her. So what would I have done? If I'm the judge, I'm not locking her up. No way. No way. And this gets back to something that, I was critiquing Tucker Carlson on this front, because he was saying that, like, this lockdown is becoming like we're creating internment camps, like COVID is going to lead to internment camps and all of your rights are taken away. And my argument to him was like, dude, our rights are already gone from NSA spying and the Patriot Act and the illegal offensive wars of aggression. Like they've been gone, okay? And a lockdown is not, we have a pandemic. Like, what do you want to do? Of course, we have to do something. But I will say that for people who just can't afford it, well, yeah, they are caught between a rock and a hard place, and it's totally unfair. And Congress should have stepped up and done UBI and done rent freeze and mortgage freeze and made it so that they can get through this. And so then that leads to the question of, how do you, in a situation like we have right now, how do you enforce a lockdown? Like, what should you do? Because some people argue, if you're going to enforce it, you got to enforce it, and you got to lock people up if they violate it. That's what some people would say. Other people would say, well, don't lock people up, that goes too far, but give them a fine, which will disincentivize them from going out. That's what some people say. And then there's another position, which is a little bit more lenient, which is have the lockdown and just enforce it by having cops say, listen, you got to disperse, you can't be around here, whatever the case may be. And then that's it. There's no punishment associated with it. There's no, prison or fine or anything. It's just the cop shows up and say, you can't do this. And then the person in 95% of the time is going to listen. And then, hey, if there's 5% of the time that they're like, no, I'm not going to do it. Okay, then you leave them and let them take that risk, and it is what it is. But I think the concern is with that person, then they're also putting other people at risk, and so that it'll keep spreading if that's the approach. But it all comes right back to, but what do you want them to do if there's no UBI and no rent freeze and no mortgage freeze, and they got to feed their family? What do you want them to do? So what I would do is I would enforce the lockdown in that kind of a way where it's like, just have the cop show up and say you can't do it. And then if they do it, you kind of got to let them do it. And, there are downsides to that, but I think it's the least bad of all bad options, because the real thing that should be done, without a doubt, is universal basic income, a rent freeze, and a mortgage freeze, so that Shelley and everybody like her doesn't feel like I have no choice here. I have to go to work. So, and for the record, I do think that things are opening up too soon, just to be clear. I do. Don't get me wrong. I've always been of the belief that things that can be open should be open. I'm a proponent of beaches and parks being open as long as you have reasonable social distancing. And I read an article this morning that evidence is mounting that outside there's very little transmission of the virus. The danger is more indoors. So I'm totally in favor of things outside with social distancing, with those things being opened up. But it's a tough one, because when it comes to salons and barbershops, don't kid yourself, man. Don't kid yourself. That's dangerous. It is. And I think it's opening up too soon, but, without UBI and rent freeze and mortgage freeze, I don't know what you can do. What are you going to do? I can't tell her no, because she can't pay the bills. So really, honestly, my anger and the onus goes on Congress. It does. It goes on Congress, because they needed to do UBI, they needed to do rent freeze and mortgage freeze, and the fact that they didn't, now they put people in this terrible position. So they spent $5 trillion in bailouts, and people still have to pay rent and mortgage on no income. It's ridiculous, and it shows you the government's not working for you. And now they are actually oppressing you, locking her up for 7 days because of this. I think that goes way too far. I'm curious what everybody else thinks. I'm curious what you guys think.